rules. One of us has something they shouldn't have. He turned his back on us, so we turn our backs on him.
Don't ask me what happened. I don't have all the answers. I can put pieces together. But it don't add up to much.
Now remember, everyone, we live together here, or we fend for ourselves out there.
I'm leaving tomorrow before the first bell.
Where would we go?
Somewhere safe. North.
We can't just go north. Don't know what's out there.
I know what's here.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. There's number 4.
There's no yesterday. There's only today.
And today, I prepare for tomorrow.
Just gonna get right into it. This is my first post-apocalypse movie post-election, so thank you for that experience. It was kind of cathartic to have that. I can't imagine that's what was on your mind when you went into production.
We planned that.
Yeah, a year and a half ago, you saw Trump coming down the escalator, and you were like, "Post-apocalypse movie, here we go."
Exactly.
So where did this movie come from? It's beautifully shot. You said you made it all around Detroit, and it's this like incredibly photographed science fiction dystopia about sort of teenagers running a society.
Running amok. Yeah, I was in Detroit a few years before we filmed this on another project and kind of was so fascinated and curious, like almost like a little kid in all these abandoned spaces. Like when you're a kid and you want to explore places, that's what I wanted to do as an adult and wanted to make a movie there.
A lot of people I feel like have a natural predilection towards abandoned and dilapidated spaces, especially people who like movies, I think, because sort of grow up with horror movies where Robert Englund is running around sort of dilapidated factories and boilers and stuff.
There's so much abandoned spaces there, houses, factories, and so the city of Detroit kind of became our back lot or studio.
Is that where the sort of the germ of the idea first came from?
Yeah, the germ of the idea came from the location and exploring location as a character.
And so then you built this. Why did you build this sort of post-apocalyptic, dystopic society around teenagers?
It kind of using the location. It is dystopian, and I was always fascinated by books like Lord of the Flies. And so in this world, there's no adults, and what happens when kids run amok? A little bit like if you know of the Stanford Prison Experiment. You know, the sheep and the wolves and what happens and people getting drunk with power. It felt natural to set it in the world of high school and teenagers, and it's still really a high school teenager experience. It's just exaggerated because of the circumstances they're under.
Well, it's smart because the high school teenager experience never really ends, I think.
Still clicks.
It still clicks in the sense that it's a microcosm of the hierarchies that we form even later in life as adults. Things become a little more vague at times and not as defined as high school, but that microcosm of like who is the important person, who is the least important person, and who is the person even less important than that, so that the least important person can make fun of even harder exists in real life.
It's the darkest, most depressing John Hughes movie ever made. That's what this is.
That's exactly what it is. Now, Morgan, you're originally a documentary filmmaker, right? Or you've made a few documentaries. Is that how you got in touch with Morgan?
Yes, I directed a documentary several years ago called Confessions of a Superhero, and we connected on that. Then I did a follow-up documentary called Meet the Hitlers that just premiered on Showtime this summer that Morgan executive produced. And that evolved into Morgan coming aboard Go North.
And what was your pitch to Morgan to get him to come aboard?
Well, he's basically like, he sent me kind of the outline of what they were shooting, sent me kind of the working script that they had, and as a lifelong fan of Lord of the Flies as well, he goes, it's Lord of the Flies, but in Detroit with these kids. What do you think? And I was like, I think I love it already. I was like, this is exactly the type of stories I love telling.
Morgan, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but how many sort of non-documentary narrative features have you sort of been a part of?
Well, this is the first one. This is kind of there's a couple that we've been involved with that haven't come out yet, but this is kind of the first one to kind of come out into the world where we kind of help shepherd it through the process and help get the distribution for the film. And so it's exciting. You know, we've always wanted to kind of start to bridge over into more scripted fare and to kind of have this movie kind of be the one that we're coming out with first is really beautiful.
Is it nerve-wracking to sort of move into scripted fare after having been such a huge part of documentary for so long, which you still are? Obviously, you're sort of straddling both worlds, but was it slightly nerve-wracking to try to make that transition a little bit?
I mean, if I was on set having to deal with it every day, probably, but luckily I didn't have to. That's why Matt was there dealing with all that. But I think from our standpoint, it was a pretty painless and seamless process, and something that we were just really passionate about. So it wasn't too hard.
What were your sort of barometers for what you wanted to be a part of in terms of narrative features?
I mean, for me, it's things that I think are different types of worlds or unique worlds, as you said, like this idea of exploring kind of a high school world, but in a dystopian society. I was very excited by. I love the cast that he got. I think these kids are really great. They have a great look on screen, and kind of putting them in the middle of this universe, where everything is kind of fallen apart and collapsed. I thought was just really smart. And so for me, it's again, how do you tell maybe it's something we recognize or something we like, but in a different way? What are the attractions that we have as viewers to that type of a world, and what is the story that exists within that onion as you start to unpeel it?
And Matt, when you were constructing this, what were your thoughts about how the world got this way for your characters?
It's interesting with so many post-apocalyptic dystopian films. It's usually a virus or it's zombies. We specifically didn't want to reveal what happened.
Right.
In
fact,
as
we're seeing right now, it's not just one thing.
Right, it could be anything, and I don't even call it a post-apocalyptic film. It's really a coming-of-age journey with a post-apocalyptic setting. Yeah. It could have happened anytime, anywhere, and so we don't really reveal it. And in fact, Jacob Laughlin, who plays the main character, Josh, his first voiceover line says, "Don't ask me what happened because I don't remember." So that right off the bat says, if there's no adults around to tell you what happened, and there's no news to tell you what happened, then you don't necessarily know what happened. And
you don't really have the frame of mind to contextualize it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we sort of look at the audience the same as Jacob Laughlin's character, Josh. He doesn't know, so you don't know. And so he's trying to remember along the way.
What was it like for you moving from documentary to narrative? Did you use a lot of the sort of chops that you picked up making doc?
Yeah, I mean, this was the hardest thing I've ever done in independent film. With a doc, depending on where it is, you can continue to go back and shoot with that character because it's a real person.
There's still stuff happening.
There's still stuff happening,
Or you can go back and get more new B-roll with that person and put it back in the
at a low cost.
Because that person's still living their life. Like, you don't have to fly them in to wherever this location is to kind of capture them.
You just wear that outfit that you wore 2 years ago and go get them out for me, thanks.
Exactly. You're in Detroit. I have four main actors that live in 4 different cities. There's art direction. There's wardrobe. I can't go back. You're limited to your budget and your schedule, which is tough on an independent film because there's a lot of compromises you have to make in terms of coverage, takes, whereas in a doc, you can kind of keep going. There's a lot of similarities. I mean, it's certainly my experience doing docs informed an authenticity I wanted from the actors, but I did a lot of homework beforehand. to
I
get
will
ready
also
for
say,
this.
but also to say something else about Mr. Ogens is that Matt's a photographer. He is a shooter. He has a beautiful eye. Like if you look at his films, and from Confessions of a Superhero to Meet the Hitlers, like they're beautiful movies. They're beautifully constructed in how they look, and so kind of that you see that transition into what this movie is because it's a beautifully shot film, a beautifully constructed film. Each frame is like a little painting unto itself, and that's part of what attracted me years ago when I saw Confessions of a Superhero, his first doc that we distributed. That I loved it. I was like, this guy is a real talent and a great visual storyteller, and I think that transition was really easy for him from docs to narrative films.
Can you talk a little bit more about maybe the first time you realized that that compromise is such a huge part of making a narrative film?
Day one.
Yeah.
When you got to keep your time and like how much are we shooting today? How many pages we got to get done by?
Yeah.
Can we get one more take? And your AD's like, no.
I think we did a 21-day shoot, but we were on off days shooting B-roll, grabbing actors, doing walking shots. I mean, a lot of these scenics and sort of journey walking shots were done with just like me and the DP and the actors on our own, wandering around Detroit, breaking into abandoned locations, getting chased out by cops or
Were you chased out by cops at one point?
A couple times. And
at this point, they're kind of goddamn filmmakers. Get out of here.
yeah, I mean, we were doing sometimes 5 to 7 pages a day, which is a lot. So you have to move so fast. You don't have time to sort of maybe get all the coverage you want or the takes you want to maybe go off script or experiment. But that's how it is on independent films. That's the nature of the beast.
How specific? I mean, I've never been to Detroit, but the way that it feels like it all looks like your film. So how specific do you have to get with your locations when you're doing like 7 or 8 pages a day? Can you be like, okay, that scene's here, let's move just like right here because we have a similar layout no matter what?
I mean, because we had a footprint, it wasn't just a few of us, and we have, actors and unions and stuff, we had to get permits for a lot of places. It had to be buttoned up. But we moved fast. Most of the locations you see, we didn't do any art direction. They just were like that. I think, for our budget, we were pretty ambitious. I think we had 35 locations in the film, visual effects, stunts, sometimes 50 to 60 extras. I did everything you're not supposed to do for a low-budget independent film, like where
You had kids and animals.
I had kids
Yeah.
and animals, like, in the movie Room, which I love. It's one room for most of it. I did the
characters
opposite
for most
two
of it.
characters. So, but I liked that challenge. It was hard but rewarding work.
Morgan, as we said, your first documentary, maybe it was your
Super Size Me.
Super Size Me.
Yeah.
Huge brain fart there, sorry. When you made that documentary, it was at a period of time where documentaries just sort of, that and I think Michael Moore's around that time immediately just propelled documentary filmmaking to the mainstream.
Yeah.
And it's been in the mainstream for a little while, but at the same time now, the internet and websites are making small docs all the time, and news stories are coming out all the time. And it seems to me harder to find a subject as a documentary filmmaker that can withstand the 1 year process of potentially making it.
Or 90 minutes, or even like a feature length. This is something we deal with filmmakers all the time who come to us with ideas, and it's a great 20 to 30 minute story, but they want to make a feature length film, and not all ideas should be feature length films. And when we made Super Size Me, this is a crazy thing to think about. That movie came out in 2004. This was pre-Facebook. This was pre-YouTube. There was no Twitter. This was kind of at the very tail end of independent cinema, of independent film. This was kind of the last, I think, big hurrah of independent movies, because then out of that came the explosion of digital content and digital distribution. And I think that with that came this amazing opportunity for filmmakers like myself and Matt, where you have so many now different places for your films to go, but at the same time, they weren't building more movie theaters. So you have thousands more people making movies, but you have the exact same amount of screens you're fighting for. So to get a movie into theater, to kind of get those type of accolades became much harder, but the amount of places where you could have docs be seen got infinitely larger. And I think that's the best part, as a doc filmmaker now. I mean, it took me making a movie about One Direction to actually have a documentary that I made play in my hometown of Beckley, West Virginia. Like I had never had a movie, and every movie I ever made play in my hometown until then. And my mom went with her friends, and it was very exciting. But more people have seen my work, Matt's work, on places like Netflix now than anywhere else, on iTunes, on Showtime, HBO, on their on-demand platforms, just because now we have instant access. And I think that type of access is awesome for storytellers, and it only makes it better. It increases the challenge of how do you keep someone's attention, and I'm all for that, because I think at the end of the day, the cream will always continue to rise to the top.
Well, that said, though, something like Super Size Me, which had a very particular point that it was trying to make about nutrition, about food, and about the fast food industry.
That I'm fat and lazy. That was the point. Yeah.
It was able to break through the noise. And it seems to me now, if you want to make a documentary that proves a point, it's harder and harder to break.
Well, there's so much noise now. There's infinitely more noise.
You can just hold on to your own noise.
That's right.
You don't have to be like, oh, that's just a liberal documentary. I don't really care about that. I'm just going to stick to my noise right here.
That's right. You can actually put all your own noise out on YouTube and have millions of followers who just pay you to make that content. I think that we work with a lot of YouTubers who want to make the transition to making longer form content for both TV and for film, and there is still that jump you have to make, because telling a story in 3 minutes is very different than 30 minutes, which is very different than 60, which is very different than 90. Holding and enrapturing someone for 90 minutes to 2 hours is a real skill. And there's a real story arc that you have to define, that you feel like you're taking someone on this journey, and I don't feel like I'm just getting the same thing over and over again for 90 minutes.
So that brings me back to your film. How difficult was it for you to go from location to then finding the story where you felt like you could bring someone on for 90 minutes? How difficult was it for you to sort of develop and write and create that arc?
For Go North, you mean? I had done 2 feature docs before. I've done TV documentary work. So I understood narrative arc and emotional arc and character development. Even if it's a doc that's a real person, you still need that character arc and emotional arc. So that was easy. The only difference was really, like I said, the budget constraints and working with actors rather than a real person.
How were you with actors on your first couple days?
I felt really in my element, but I did a lot of homework beforehand. I worked with a woman named Judith Weston who wrote the book on directing actors called Directing Actors. She's worked with Inarritu and a lot of people, and I spent 2 hours a week with her going line by line from page 1 till the end, only working on characters, their intent. I didn't go in and just say, oh, I'm going to use my intuition. I had a plan for every scene, and if that didn't work with the actor, I had a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. I still used intuition, but I had a fallback, so it wasn't like I just did it. It was very planned.
Can you give an example of how you had to sort of pull those plan A's and plan B's out?
Sure. I had really good actors to work with. I think casting is half the battle. I had Jacob Laughlin, who you might have seen.
He's great, yeah.
So good, with Mud and a movie called Little Accidents, and he's in The Last Maze Runner. Sophie Kennedy-Clark, who played the young Judi Dench in Philomena. She was in Nymphomaniac. Patrick Schwarzenegger. So I had good actors. James Blore, who played the bad guy. And they understood the script, and they were really talented. But it's not telling them how to act. It's using backstory and history and as-ifs. I'll give you an example. Sophie Kennedy-Clark, Patrick Schwarzenegger play brother and sister. And she's sort of pulling away from him, and he gets a little bit controlling. So I had him play it as if that was his girlfriend pulling away from him. Not literally, but using that as a performance, which I think worked. So it's kind of using metaphors and verbs and facts and history rather than, bigger or, louder, more intense, which is not really playable action.
I think that actually, that what you told him to do actually comes across in the movie a little bit, and it adds to the sort of danger of this world and the sort of mystery of the relationships that these teenagers would form together, and how sort of safe they are or aren't within this world.
Yeah. Sort of a hunter-gatherer society. You know, you like to think that before this apocalypse happened that a lot of these kids were in the same cliques. You know, Caleb, Patrick Schwarzenegger, and his group were probably the jocks, and you know, Jacob Laughlin, who played Josh, was the misunderstood, you know, kid who wants to connect and doesn't belong, and Sophie's the girl that everyone's sort of in love with. It's still translated after the apocalypse, just more exaggerated.
Now, you mentioned Patrick Schwarzenegger is in it. Does it change things? Does it change the dynamic when you have a Schwarzenegger on set?
No, I mean, he was like one of the guys, you know, one of the kids, very warm and into it. And, you know, I think that because of the name, he's a Schwarzenegger and a Kennedy. Yeah, Maria Shriver is his mom. She came to visit one day.
Just to see what her boy was up to.
Yeah,
Make sure
I
he's in
mean,
good hands.
he's got more to prove than the others. You know, he's got to sort of say, I'm, you know, a real actor, and he has more to prove, so he's got to work harder. And I made him work harder.
Did you ever taunt him?
What's that?
I would totally taunt a Schwarzenegger when I made him, if I was making him work harder.
He's pretty big. He's got his dad's body. I gotta be careful with that.
Let's hear some questions from the audience. Who has questions?
Yeah, hi. It's interesting. I'm very much looking forward to seeing your documentary. When I was younger, I used to, watch similar themed, like Lord of the Flies or Children of the Corn with a Stephen King movie, and I used to sort of wonder, where would I sort of fit into that society if it were to really happen? And nowadays, since I have a 15-year-old son, I would kind of think about where would he sort of fit in. And I think, sort of a theme that I've sort of learned through watching those films is that the people who sort of directed them want us to feel as though the kids really need us. They can't really make it without us. And nowadays, kids are a lot more sort of independent, and they have their own groups, and a lot of parents don't even see their kids anymore. We basically give them some money and then they disappear, and they have pretty much a lot of independence. And I was just wondering, since it's never happened before where all the parents, all the adults just disappear, so there isn't really any historical basis to sort of make the story around. I know that obviously a lot of creativity and imagination had to sort of go into the scenarios and coming up with interesting and realistic things about what could happen. But I was just wondering, in terms of developing the story, what sort of information did you find most relevant to sort of creating the story in the most sort of realistic and honest way possible? And second of all, what do you think would really happen, say in a society like an urban society like New York, if all the adults did actually disappear? Do you think it would be very much like Go North, or do you think it would be somewhat different?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, some of the stuff that's in the film does happen in our schools. We see it on the news, where kids kind of take over. There's cliques, there's, the jocks and everything, like I said, the misunderstood kid. It's just more exaggerated, and there's no boundaries. So there's no teachers or adults to teach or set boundaries or ground you or give you detention. And so, in the case of this film, Caleb and his cronies get drunk with power, and there's no one there to stop them. They set the laws. So I think there's similarities, and I pulled from stuff from my childhood. When I was growing up, I'm from D.C., Maryland. There wasn't filmmaking. It wasn't cool to be in drama or art or tech like it is today. You're a boy in Maryland, you play sports, and I played sports, but I liked climbing trees and setting fires and building forts and getting in trouble. And so while I had a lot of friends, I also felt disconnected and misunderstood. So without realizing it till you just asked that question, I pulled from my own experiences as well.
Next question.
Hey guys, I have a story to tell you. I worked at McDonald's for like 4 days once, and it was the worst 4 days of my life. Anyway, but so I was wondering, I know you just made the movie and everything, but I feel like, would you ever be wondering or maybe into making a sequel so that we do find out what happened to the parents?
I hadn't thought about it. I mean, I kept the movie kind of open-ended at the end, not thinking, oh, I'll make a sequel, but it is open-ended where there could be a TV series. So anything's possible. I tend to kind of...
You always got to leave that open.
Yeah,
it's like, you never know.
Exactly.
Terrible business decision just to wrap it all up.
Yeah.
Anything's possible. Networks, if you're listening. You want
Some action figures.
I think we have time for one more question. Ooh, right here.
Yeah, hi.
You look like you could be in the movie. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Looks like Jacob, right?
No, I'm very intrigued, and like I think a lot of us in the age we are getting more intrigued by documentaries and kind of stepping out of the mythical or very narrative storyline. I'm curious also mentioning your approach with one of the characters not knowing then the audience doesn't know. And also kind of speaking of your inspiration of the empty buildings and this and that, what is it you really want the audience to take away from this film? Or what kind of questions do you want to spring in their mind or to have them walk away with or think about?
I mean, there's themes that are relatable today. That's why I say it's a coming-of-age drama wrapped up in a dystopian setting. So there's themes like hope and finding meaning and wanting to connect that we all relate to at any age. And so I would hope you'd come away with that, sort of that anything's possible. And I mean, you have to see the movie to get it, but taking that chance and doing something you're afraid of.
Yeah, having faith in other people, I think, is a big piece of this story.
Yeah. Absolutely, guys. When can people see Go North?
It comes out a week from Friday, January 13th, Friday the 13th, in 10 cities theatrically, VOD, iTunes. If you go to my Twitter, Matt Ogens, or Facebook, look me up, Matt Ogens, or Instagram, you'll see all the listings of the theater information and where you can see it.
Awesome, guys. Congratulations. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.